In my Justice League Action video, I mentioned how much I loved superheroes and I watched some of the funniest shows in the 90s out of desperation. In my Flash video, I mentioned how as a kid, I thought I was the only one who loved The Flash and Spider-Man. To take those 2 points a step further, my childhood somehow deluded me into thinking that superheroes were a very niche or niche concept. Every time I saw one referenced in a cartoon, I thought I was the only one who understood why it was cool. And to be fair, comic books weren't always cool or whatever back then, but I greatly underestimated how popular they were or could be. I say all that to say, as a kid, I was really blown away by the decision from William Hanna and
Hanna-Barbera
to focus on bringing superheroes to our TV screens back then. Whether it was the bigger, more popular brands or some of these goofy original shows that they created, the vision was always there. That's one of the reasons I've always respected that company, regardless of all the flack that they got for their low-quality animations. They were introducing so much newness and innovation in storytelling to the cartoon industry. Some may say to a fault, because they really did flood the market with similar cartoons, but still. If you ask anyone who grew up on these shows, whether it's Yogi Bear or Huckleberry Hound or Wally Gator or Quick Draw McGraw or even Snagglepuss, everyone had their favorites. And if you watch Yogi's Treasure Hunt, which was like the Avengers of the mid-80s, you could see all the differences between the characters as they interacted. So they weren't a complete copy-paste. And before I get into the superheroes,
Hey, yo, pause!
Something that translated from these sillier shows to the superheroes who were supposed to be taken more seriously was the backgrounds. They were always so imaginative and appropriate and added variety to the visual experience. As a kid, I always felt like I visited a whole lot of places watching these shows, which is a whole other topic of why I don't like fighting games or games with boss battles, because the adventure and discovery of the world hits a wall and you have to stay in this one spot and fight this damn thing before you can move on and continue exploring the world. But I digress. Of their entire superhero roster, I think Birdman, Space Ghost, Blue Falcon, and Dynomutt were the most widely known, with Mightor to a lesser extent, just going by their pop culture notoriety, which may also have been helped a bit by those Adult Swim shows from the 90s and early 2000s, but I wasn't really a fan of those. The original shows, which were all structured as Monster of the Week episodes, all aired in the 60s with one notable touchstone of the times. The laser had just been invented or tested or announced to the world depending on how pedantic you want to be, and this was very evident in all 3 of the shows that aired in the 60s. Space Ghost, Birdman, and Mightor all used lasers to solve their problems in ways that are perfectly reflective of the 60s. Nobody outside of science really knew what lasers would be used for, so as you can imagine, they were used just like nanotechnology in the latter stages of the MCU. They did whatever the situation called for or whatever the writers needed the heroes to do to resolve whatever conflict they wrote them into.
I fear that my daughter is in the hands of the evil Serpent Queen.
I shall find out with the power vision of my club.
Which doesn't quite hold up by modern standards, having seen the attempts at implementing science into superpowers today.
Right! The 5 steps of the scientific method. Those steps are observation, hypothesis, prediction, experimentation, and conclusion.
But they fit perfectly in the genre, or should I say medium, of Saturday morning cartoons. Dumb pulp action with low stakes that harkens back to a simpler time when all these shows were supposed to do was entertain us and sell toys. And I really would grab a bunch of these if I found them on a store shelf. This was the era when villains preferred to set traps for the heroes and leave them to their doom for some reason. Well, I guess they were fun tools of suspense for the viewers. The villains had no interest in confirming that they succeeded, which always made for a fun moment when the hero popped up later unharmed.
Action Hank! Action Hank! But I thought we left you in the clutches of the giant squid!
Seems you got tied up at the last minute, but I'm here to straighten you out.
If we were rating them on quality, Birdman had to be the sloppiest, both in animation and storytelling, and I thought it was the first out the gate, but it actually premiered a year after Space Ghost and the same year as Mightor. Either they had their C-team working on it, or they had started hitting diminishing returns on quality by spreading themselves too thin. And it wasn't just the quality of the animation either, although that did affect how scenes skipped through important events for convenience, but the storytelling was really sloppy. Birdman got his powers from the Egyptian sun god Ra, and seemed to be an interesting amalgamation of DC Comics' Hawkman with the wings, Superman with the solar absorption to retain his powers, and Marvel's Falcon with a birdie sidekick who was interestingly called Avenger.
Good boy, Avenger!
He also yelled a lot for some reason.
Birdman!
You know that guy was inspired by him. Well, yeah, but I was kinda talking about the other guy. Okay, that too, but I mean the other guy.
3-6 Mafia!
No, the other guy.
DJ Khaled!
There you go.
DJ Khaled! DJ Khaled! DJ Khaled! DJ!
Okay, enough.
Why am I yelling?
Birdman!
The show had really cool villain designs and those classic names.
X, the Eliminator.
It's Mentor. I, Cumulus, Master Meteorologist, have gained control over the very elements themselves.
The evil genius, Morto, was the biggest threat to world peace.
No one shall stand in the way of Morto the Marauder.
It looks like the work of FEAR.
Anything else, Falcon 7?
Yes, the thieves are a ringmaster, a strongman, and a human fly.
But man, Birdman was easily rendered powerless if the sun was obscured for any amount of time.
I need sunlight. My body needs the sun's rays. I'm losing my power.
Exactly.
Even as an 8-year-old, I remember talking to my friends about how useless he was and how he talked like this.
Here, get the magnifying glass on the table. Now bring it over here. Now, focus.
Hey, yo.
We joked about his kryptonite being the shade or an umbrella, but ultimately it was just a device by the writers to create stakes. Admittedly in the most hilarious and enfeebled way.
Without your precious son, you're like a weak kitten.
He also seemed to have focal dystonia every time he had a close-up shooting his laser beams because Spider-Man he was most certainly not. He also created a solar shield which he could hold in his hands, which I guess was him solidifying solar energy. Admittedly not a very cool power, just going by plausibility. Everything about this show is just unintentionally hilarious to me.
Hold it! You're trapped!
The human fly trapped? Never!
And is probably a goldmine for a React streamer. I saw a comment somewhere saying that the only reason to watch it is to make fun of it. I should probably have given this show its own video, to be honest.
How's that for openers, Birdman?
It's just me against the world.
Space Ghost, which was the older show but better animated, didn't really have a backstory. Not that Birdman's Egyptian mythology ever really played a role in his stories, but Space Ghost was just straight up space adventure. You either boarded the spaceship or not. There wasn't much more of a hook than that. He could fly and turn invisible, hence the Ghost moniker, but most of his powers like force fields and power beams came from his gadgets. Kinda like Batman's utility belt, but on his forearms. They literally did anything the situation called for. The villains, like those in Birdman, had cool designs and gimmicks with a lot of insectoid creatures, and some of them seemed to be the precursor to characters like Boba Fett. Very cool and mysterious mercenaries whose personalities and goals were left to the viewer's imagination, but they were also much more serious and creepy than those in Birdman. Space Ghost was a lot of fun, but even as a kid, I always hated that he had sidekicks. Even now, watching it back, I get very impatient when the kids and their monkey are on screen. I was never the kid who liked seeing kids or sidekicks in my cartoons. I always thought, this is Space Ghost's show, so let's see Space Ghost doing cool things. For some reason, I always preferred the muscular adult hero who was capable of defeating all sorts of villains. The bumbling sidekicks and comedic relief always felt superfluous. Maybe I was a weird kid, but that stuff was always annoying. Jan and Jace and that little monkey were basically on the show to be rescued by Space Ghost, and to say things that would get them in trouble today.
You say the reactor failed on your space coupe?
That's what I said. But, well, you know how it is with women drivers.
Explain to us what you mean by that.
When rewatching it for this video, it stood out to me that they were always on separate ships going in different directions, and I kept wondering, where are they even going? And they spoke about going home to do homework, but I don't know what space school they attended or where they even found the time.
Anything to get out of your homework, huh?
I'm talking to Space Ghost, if you don't mind.
That was probably just added in there to relate to the kids or to set a good example. And Mightor, who looked like something out of a Frank Frazetta fantasy comic, was more like Shazam in pre-Flintstones times, which is a very inspired elevator pitch if I ever heard one.
You have learned to mend the nets well, Shira.
Yes, we must have them ready for when our men fish the seas.
It had all the tropes of Superman and Zorro's secret identities.
I was wrong about you. You're a coward. Zorro!
Where his female companion would be very condescending to him as his civilian cover, while at the same time marveling at the heroics of Mightor because she didn't know that they were one and the same.
Wasn't Mightor wonderful, Tor?
If you like the hero type.
That's something you don't have to worry about, Tor. Nothing will ever change you.
Another comparison that I would have to make would be He-Man, because his female friend was also called She-Ra.
Down there, Todd. She-Ra's on that cliff.
I guess a little weak boy transforming into a hulking man was all the rage back then.
Shazam!
And like I criticized in the Space Ghost show, Mightor had his own occasional nuisance of a sidekick called Little Rock.
Oh no, Little Rock!
Who was quite akin to Scrappy-Doo.
What's a Scrappy?
Don't worry, I'll take care of Brutor.
Let me at him! Let me at him! Let me at him! Let me at him!
Look away, Daphne. We all promised each other that we would never speak of him. Not ever.
And similar to the other two shows, they had the Monster of the Week format, but after revisiting all these shows, and I don't mean to get political at all, but in current year, these villains are feeling more and more realistic.
I, Korg, control the beasts. I will be chief of the village, or I will destroy you all.
It has always been the critique to refer to these villains as cartoonish. None of them had very intricate or empathetic causes that led to their villainy. They want to dominate and control other groups of people, and there isn't much more to it than that.
My desire is for power. But before I take control of the country, I want Birdman out of the way.
Faster! Soon we will be upon the village, where we will take more slaves.
The hunger for power, or the greed for resources, or the arbitrary revenge plots, or just outright hating other people for existing could not be any more relatable in today's world if these cartoons were a documentary.
What's in those cages?
People. These lizard creeps are space slavers.
Space slavers?
I've heard of them. They hijack ships and sell the passengers into slavery.
Something I did find interesting in all these shows as well was that the monsters or the villains would attack at the beginning, but as the episode went on, it always turned out that there was a mastermind behind that basic monster attack. To be fair, they never really meant for these shows to be binged, so when you watch them one after another, the formula can feel silly. And about 10 years after all these shows debuted came Dynomutt Dog Wonder, which spun out of the Scooby-Doo franchise, down to having a similar intro to the Scooby-Doo show, which released the same year. It was a sort of Batman and Inspector Gadget amalgamation of a bird-themed hero who was the Blue Falcon and a bumbling mechanical dog sidekick who could mechanize all sorts of random solutions to their problems. I had mixed feelings with this one because the good stuff is really good. But like I said before, I don't really care for sidekicks or dumb bumbling characters in my action-adventure shows. Blue Falcon was very wealthy, and one thing that made me enjoy his alter ego over Bruce Wayne was that he had a bright fancy penthouse with a pool rather than a dark depressing cave, and a lot of their adventures took place in fancy or exciting places. What I never quite liked about him was that I always waited for Blue Falcon to be the cool action hero, but he was typically more of a quarterback who called the plays for Dynomutt, and more often than not yelled at him for messing up.
Dog Wonder, I'll give you 10 seconds to find your brakes and get us out of this mess. Dog Wonder, that's the last time
But I have to say, it was a little annoying how inconsistent this dynamic was. Dynomutt would mess up sometimes, but be extremely competent other times, and Blue Falcon's patience for his mistakes also varied. Sometimes you expected him to blow his top, but he would be so chill.
It's okay, Dog Wonder, we all make mistakes. Yours are a little bigger, but we all make mistakes.
But overall, Falcon did not do very much in any of the episodes.
I'll surprise him from the rear.
Hey, yo, pause!
I also perfectly understood the attempt at humor, but Dynomutt always got on my nerves.
'Cause we still like movies with a happy ending.
What do you mean by that?
And I guess it's worse when you binge the show, but watching episodes every now and then would make him more tolerable. They took the approach that shows like The Mentalist, when it was good, and other police procedurals would later adopt, of picking locations and stories that were relevant to the guest characters in each episode. They had so much variety of locations and cool cinematography, as well as 22-minute episodes, which gave it a very premium feel in comparison to Space Ghost, Birdman and Mightor, which ran as 7-minute segments. That did mean, however, that Blue Falcon and Dynomutt would fail a lot to pad out the runtime, which made them look incompetent sometimes.
This doesn't help our superhero image, Dog Wonder.
Until they inevitably captured the villains. Scooby-Doo and the gang also cameoed quite a bit on the show and helped them to solve mysteries. The coolest thing for me about their cameos was how unannounced they were. You'd just be going along with the episode, then they would show up chasing their own mystery. And in the true spirit of Scooby-Doo, the villains came in with very dumb schemes, like flooding a city so that they could rob it on a raft while everyone else was forced to evacuate.
Everyone's going to leave this city and then we'll strip it clean!
Or this guy who could have worn a mask to commit his robberies, but decided instead to go through the tedious and risky process of turning himself into a monster. Also, because forced diversity has come up a few times in my previous videos, I will say people forget that this was a 70s animated show with a black mayor who was just another character. They didn't call any attention to him and he just fit into the world organically as this suave, elitist guy with high standards for Falcon and Dynomutt.
You've got to save that train, Blue Falcon!
Oh, we were better off with just corn.
The narrator on the show was quite funny as well, which added to the comedic nature of the show, and I would imagine later inspired shows like the Powerpuff Girls.
Big city, a glittering metropolis where millions of law-abiding citizens work and play.
The city of Townsville. The city of Townsville.
One thing that I did notice that cut across a lot of these shows was the heroes receiving missions through a TV screen or an electronic device like they did on Charlie's Angels.
Morning, Bosley. Good morning, Angels.
Good morning, Charlie.
It's a trend that Hanna-Barbera would carry into the 80s with Yogi's Treasure Hunt, but I'm not quite sure why they liked that trope so much. The villains also had inexplicable surveillance on the heroes.
I have a feeling we'll meet her again.
And when we do, you will know how terrible.
So that they could deliver those one-liners about how they will destroy them. It's just one of those things I appreciate because it felt very representative of a moment in time when it felt cool or high-tech to receive missions through a TV screen. I also found it funny how all these shows got the size scaling for their villains wrong depending on the scene. The monsters would be skyscraper-sized in one scene and fit inside a building in the other scene, which is a giveaway of cheap or lazy animation, but I guess it was just a hallmark of the times. All in all, a lot of staples of modern-day superhero stories can be found in these shows, including villains coming together to form an Injustice League or similar groupings of that nature. They were all just pure adventure with a sense of wonder and excitement.
I am Space Ghost of the Galaxies. To whom do I owe my thanks?
I am Mightor, and this is Tog. We are of this village. But what brought you here?
Something called a time warp.
Which has been lost over the years with our modern attempts at over-sophistication in storytelling. Back then, they just skipped from action to action and let us mentally stitch the scenes together. They didn't even need to wrap an episode up in a neat bow. Some villains were disposed of in extremely violent ways that were making me laugh out loud on my current rewatch.
Turn back, you fool! It's too late!
Too late to save him. There's going to be another explosion.
What? It was kinda like, whoops, I guess we should get out of here. The fate of the villains just depended on where they were before the screen went dark. Like the heroes could save them, but sometimes they just couldn't be bothered because the credits were about to roll.
Nothing left. Not a sign of life.
Zorak should have stayed in jail. It was safer there.
And sometimes Birdman would just give up on capturing the villain and leave.
There's the perfect place to hide.
He could be any one of those 60,000 people, Avenger. But sooner or later, he'll come face to face with his nemesis. Birdman!
How heroic of him. A thing I've seen complained about online a lot is the exposition in these shows.
That mace will explode when it comes in contact with Birdman.
But I think they were just a consequence of the times. Cartoons, let alone superheroes, weren't as widely understood as they are today, so some of these actions that are shorthand to us today would leave random viewers in the 60s confused, because they didn't have the benefit of decades of context. All in all, I very highly recommend throwing these shows on if you need some background noise, but for Blue Falcon and Dynomutt, the series has aged extremely well and I would unironically encourage you to watch it, especially if you have kids in need of some good old Saturday morning adventure cartoons. Let me know which of these was your favorite and if you want me to cover any more Hanna-Barbera classics, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.
Soon to be Emperor of the Universe.
Emperor of the Universe? There's no such thing.
Is this